Well, once again, you're joining us for our election series. It is election time. Here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we will elect a new governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and all 100 seats of the House of Delegates is up for re-election. Where do we stand on issues? What is the state of Virginia? And has Virginia always been this way? It's State of the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for our 2025 election series here for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Once again, we'd like to thank you all for joining us, as you always do, on this Sunday morning as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB, Hot 91, the soul of VA. Well, listen, we've had an invigorating start to the semester, all the excitement around football, the Coach Vic experience, and, again, enrollment is increasing, and it's just a great vibe here in Norfolk and here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, especially Hampton Roads. And with all of that, we have our election that's happening as well. A lot of things are going, a lot of things are happening, and here at Norfolk State University, where we bring people, politics together, we once again have been chosen to host the only gubernatorial debate for the Commonwealth of Virginia here on October 9th, which will be broadcast live from the campus of Norfolk State University and seen on every network of Nexstar. Here is Wavy TV 10. So it's going to be exciting. 7 o'clock, be there. This is our fourth debate that we are hosting. Actually, 3 debates statewide and 1 roundtable. In 2020, we hosted our first U.S. Senate debate with Senator Mark Warner. In 2024, we hosted our second U.S. Senate debate, which was the only one in the state, with Senator Tim Kaine, which both were incumbents and were both reelected. And in 2021, we hosted the only gubernatorial roundtable with our media partner, Nexstar, Wavy TV 10. And now we are hosting the only gubernatorial debate here on the campus of Norfolk State University. So once again, this is where people and policy meet in order for us to have a conversation about the future of Virginia. I'm really excited about the future of Virginia, and today we have with us someone who's been a phenomenal colleague over the years. When we talk, it goes for hours. He is steeped in not just journalism, but the history of the Commonwealth and the history and politics and all things. It's none other than my good friend, Leonard Colvin, who is the Chief Reporter Emeritus at the New Journal and Guide here in the great city of Norfolk, Virginia. Leonard, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, sir.
I mentioned that, you have been chief reporter emeritus for a very important newspaper. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But tell us, how long were you chief reporter at New Journal and Guide before you became emeritus?
I got out of the Navy in 1987, and I became the staff reporter and then chief reporter because I was the only reporter in 1987, and I decided to retire about 2 years ago, after many 3 decades of working and reporting on African American news in this city and the state and nationally, and promoting the idea that African American people should have publications and broadcasts that tell our story, that tell our perspective politically, socially, and economically. And I'm very proud of that, that record,
Absolutely. Listen, we know the name. Everybody knows the name. We rarely see the face, but we know the words, we know the name, we know the writing that comes about, But, with your career, of course, like you said, you started in 1987, but before that, you're a graduate of one of our great HBCUs as well. Tell us about how you got your start in your education and so forth.
Well, I got my interest in journalism by writing letters to the editor to my hometown newspaper, Stuttgart, Arkansas, however you wish to pronounce it. And I remember writing one editorial about the pollution that the rice mules in that city were causing in the black part of the city. And that a couple of days after I submitted that letter to the editor, the mayor of the city called me, scaring my mother to death, and he was apologizing for all of the problems that the pollution, the rice hulls, because you see when rice is produced, it's sent to mills to be dehulled, and that hull used to look like a snowstorm over the black community in that area. And I think it was back in 1970, 71 when that happened. The Nixon administration had created the EPA, and they were talking about pollution and filters. I suggested if the rice mills did not utilize filters and deter the pollution, that black people should stop buying rice, and that should boycott buying rice. And that scared the city fathers enough to promote the mayor to call me and say, "Oh, well, we apologize for it, and we will try to resolve the situation." So I got the itch, and I attended the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And after that, I worked for the Pine Bluff Commercial, and then I went into the Navy for a minute. And then after I got out of the Navy, spending almost 3 years in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, I came to Norfolk, got off a ship that I was assigned to, finishing my career in the Navy, and I joined the New Journaling Guide, and the rest is history. And it was a very rewarding, time for me professionally, but also I got a chance to get a great education, not only on Virginia history, but national history. It was a very extraordinary time during the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s about what was going on in the black community.
Wow. That's a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge. You mentioned Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. I think when most people mention Cuba, and you spent your sometime in the Navy there, and Guantanamo Bay, we think of Bay of Pigs, right?
The Bay of Pigs. Absolutely. But you must consider that Guantanamo Bay is separated from that island nation. It's sort of a thorn, and it was a thorn inside, or still is a thorn in the side of the Cuban government. There was the base there, but we could not leave the base to go and explore Cuba itself. We were sort of like a little small city unto ourselves. But strangely, there were Cubans who had been working on the base that had been allowed, that would bust in every morning to do work on the base, but we weren't allowed to leave the base. But it was a very interesting experience. I'm a Caribbean sailor because I spent 3 years in Cuba and visiting all the islands around. And then when I left Cuba, I came to Norfolk and got on a ship. And once upon a time, all the ships that left the shipyards in Norfolk had to go back to Cuba to get refresher training. So my ship was in the shipyard. So I had left Cuba, came to Norfolk, but my ship went back to Cuba for refresher training. And we spent the remaining months of my career sailing around the Caribbean, visiting all of the islands and whatever.
Wow. So, and after that time in the Navy, you say you started New Journaling Guide. I want our listeners to know a little bit about the New Journaling Guide that's here in Norfolk, because it's part of a network of very important dissemination of information to the black community. I want to read just a little bit about it. The New Journaling Guide has a history rooted in the early 1900s. It originated as the Gideon Safe Guide in Norfolk, Virginia in 1900, founded by a black fraternal order. It was then purchased in 1907 by P.B. Young Sr., who then transformed it into the influential weekly Norfolk Journaling Guide. The paper became a major voice for the African American community, serving as a crucial source of news during Jim Crow and World War II. And again, it gained significant influence, circulation, expanding across the South, the nation, before being renamed New Journaling Guide in 1991. And I like to point out that Brenda Andrews is currently the owner and runs the New Journaling Guide. They've been doing it for a very long time, and phenomenal job. And this year, the New Journaling Guide is celebrating 125 years in existence. Leonard, your time at New Journal and Guide as chief reporter, you say almost over 3 decades, really, you're still chief reporter emeritus. I know I just gave the history, just an overview of what you'll see in a history book or something like that, but tell us about the significance of New Journal and Guide.
It's like all of the black newspapers. The Journal and Guide is probably the third oldest black-owned publication in the nation. And it provides a voice, a perspective for African Americans. We have to tell our story. That has been the mission of the black press since the initiation of black media way back in the 19th century. We have to have a voice of our own to tell our story. And I think Ms. Andrews, over the years, has managed to keep the doors and the light shining to enable the Guide to do that. I must commend her for her hard work over the years for doing that. But especially today, in educating and enlightening African Americans and white people about the social and economic status of African Americans and the positive news that is part of our community and where we're going and where we have been. That's the purpose of the black press. Always has been, because nobody can tell our story except us,
Absolutely.
And tell it correctly.
That's right.
Especially nowadays with all of the disinformation and the misdirection that is going on in the press.
We're going to talk a little bit about that in the second half of the show. The misdirection, misinformation, the importance of telling our story, and then where we are in Virginia. You've been here several decades. You got on the ship here in Norfolk, and you never left. And your experience in your home state of Arkansas in the South. Just a wealth of knowledge, and to bring it all together to let us know why our vote matters and why it's important to vote here. But before we do that, I want our audience to know that it stayed the water. I'm your host, Eric Lavelle, and you're listening to our 2025 election series. That's right. Here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, this fall, we will elect a new governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, and all 100 seats of the House of Delegates are up for election. Now, if you want to know how you can vote and when you can, registering to vote started September 2nd. You can register to vote or update your registration now. Also, early in-person voting will start as soon as possible. As a matter of fact, you can start voting in person, early voting 45 days before the election, September 19th. That's September 19th through November 1st. And that is for the general election on this November 4th, the general election here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Make sure you visit your clerk of court's office or voter registration office in your jurisdiction in order to register to vote, update your registration, or go ahead and vote in person. Now, keep in mind, you can still vote on the day of, but take advantage of this early voting because our legislature has provided access and expanding voting in order to do so. More information about this can be found on the Virginia Department of Elections website, or give your clerk of court or voter registration office a call in your jurisdiction. So, Leonard, we talked about, you mentioned misinformation, disinformation, and the ability to tell our own story. Talk to us a little bit about, from your perspective, in the state of the Commonwealth and your experience from the South, why is it so important for us to be able to tell our own story?
Well, it's important to tell our own story because our history has been a part of American history. But before we put things in perspective today, let's look at the state's political and historical journey to this point. In doing so, we must note that blacks have played critical roles along the way, riding in the back, middle, or near the front of the conveyance bus, so to speak, metaphorically, to where we are now. During the founding of this nation, as we know, all men were created equal, did not include women or black people, as white men controlled the economic and cultural outlook of the colonial period, including Virginia, which was the largest and most powerful colony at the time. After the colonial period, Virginia, the home of the nation's first 4 presidents and a big slave breeding and exporting state, continued its position at the top of the heap, so to speak, towards the mid-19th century. Remember, Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy, which fought the Civil War to retain the right to retain the southern states' status quo in mid-19th century America, including owning slaves and denying women the right to vote. After the war, during Reconstruction, literate black men who gained the right to vote and served in the state and local governments devised, with the help of political factions like the Adjusters, devised policies to form the first public schools, abolished many of the barriers blacks faced towards freedom. The state was broken by the war economically, but blacks crafted communities and institutions, some of the first colleges like Virginia State and Virginia Union, which illustrated our desire to show that all men are created equal. But there was a backlash based on the fear that blacks would overwhelm the white-dominated system. So we saw the introduction of Jim Crow in Virginia and throughout the North and the South, where it was more strictly imposed. Political progress was halted for a century in Virginia and the nation. But the quest for freedom and inclusion and equality was continued by black people in Virginia, especially even during the era of separate but equal, based on the Supreme Court's ruling in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1889. Also, women suffragettes, black and white in Virginia, were at the forefront of crafting and pursuing passage of the 19th Amendment and gaining their right to vote. The Brown decision was one of the cracks in Jim Crow so far as segregated education and in public spaces. So we saw, again, a pushback and the emergence of massive resistance, remember that, to the ideal of an interracial community by Southern leaders like Virginia's Harry Byrd. He ran the great Byrd machine that controlled his state. He also led the powerful and controlling Southern political bloc in the U.S. Congress, which blocked passage of any civil rights laws enabling blacks and women politically, economically to move forward. The civil rights movement marched through Virginia, as you know, and by the end of the 1960s, the Byrd machine was erect and progressive politics began to take hold in the Commonwealth. Norfolk native Evelyn Butts loaned her name to the suit that killed the poll tax. At the same time, the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Acts were passed in the mid-1960s. By 1970, blacks denied political access to the polls and political office due to Jim Crow managed to elect blacks to city council and state legislative office for the first time since Reconstruction. Remember, at that time, during the early 1970s, there was a wave of moderate politics in Virginia. But instead of the Republican Party of Lincoln being the progressive force, the Republicans sought to slow that moderation and progress down. The Democrats, which had fought to instill Jim Crow and destroy Reconstruction, they had led the fight against progress, but they became the moderate politics, and black people became a solid part of that base, which still exists today. Democrats cannot win nationally or in state politics if black people do not vote. And this is why this upcoming election is so important. The first black legislators, mayors in Virginia in a century were elected, under the Democratic Party banner starting in the 1970s and forward. But with the National Republican Party led by Reagan, Bush, and now Trump pushing back against political and social progress, Virginia, with the election of conservative GOP governors and legislators, joined in to this passive regressive era in politics nationally. For some years in Virginia, Virginia was deemed a red state, but the levers of power have shifted back and forth between the two parties as moderate Democrats were replaced by conservative Republicans, as we saw recently with the election of the current governor 3 years ago, after two successive moderate governors. Many political analysts say that with the George Floyd movement, and the removal of the symbols of Jim Crow, the monuments and names from public buildings, our current governor was elected. There was this was illustrative of another backlash against black and progressive politics. Now, Virginia is not a solid blue state, but a purple one due to the Trump-era political wave in the first period, 2016, and in 2020, it regained a hold on national politics in 2024, and we find ourselves in this position where there is another pushback against black and political progress in the nation and in the state of Virginia. We now are approaching another political crossroads in state politics come November 2025. Both parties are fighting hard to secure the legislative seats and governorship in this state. The legislature, which has been in place, has been in flux with a body of progressive Democrats led by blacks and progressive whites at this time. They are pitted against GOP lawmakers who align themselves with aggressive political party trends led by the current White House. Remember, Virginia right now is the only pro-choice state in the South. It is only deemed the only progressive state in the South, and I think we should vote to retain that. Our legislature has been a safeguard against regressive politics led by Republicans in this state. So here is where the governor's race has a twist of irony. Regardless of which of the parties wins November 4th, a woman will be our next governor. Will it be former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, the moderate Democrat, or conservative Republican Winsome Sears, our current lieutenant governor, a black woman who has been seeking the president's blessing in her electoral efforts? The irony here is that as black people have sought to help fight for the progress in Virginia over the past 2.5 centuries, Earl Sears and her supporters, if they win either house of the legislature or the state house race, they would play a role as a barrier to further progress in the state. If the GOP goes down in defeat in November, it will speak loudly for the state and the national political dynamic. Will Virginia go backwards or will it move forward? Which path will the state at this point, after 250 years of seeking to answer that question, are all men created equal in America, go? Where will we go? Will we finally allow that statement that Mr. Jefferson wrote, are all men created equal, become reality in this state?
You know, just listening to that, you know, you started with the statement that was written centuries ago, that all men are created equal, and you ended with that. But in the middle, you basically filled in the influence and the history of African Americans in the political process. You know, it's very, I think that's very important, and I really wanted, and I'm glad you took the time to talk about it, because, you know, it's very easy to look now and say, oh, we got a black Speaker of the House. We have a black female who's a NSU alum who is really the most powerful person in the Senate as relates to President Pro Tem.
President Pro Tem.
You know, and chair of the Finance Committee, which can give an up or down as relates to funding across the state. And the governor saw that when he downed the deal that he thought he had to build a new stadium, you know, here in the Commonwealth. And again, we see this, the largest number of Virginia Legislative Black Caucus members in the history, and it's steady growing. We have African-American mayors here in Virginia Beach. We have 3 African-American males. African-American males all under 40 or 40 or under, right, who are representing the city of Virginia Beach in the legislature, in the Senate and the House. Just all of a sudden. You know, it's easy to look at this progress. And here in Norfolk, we had 3 African-American women representing Norfolk, 1 in the Senate and 2 in the House, 1 representing here in Norfolk State University. It's easy to look at that and say, oh, we've always had that. but we haven't. And it's also very important to understand that the way we got there is that we voted. The way we got there is that we advocated. The way we got there is we were watchdogs over the rights of people, all people, to be able to cast their vote, to be able to live in society the way that all others have been able to live for centuries. So when we look at what's happening and the rolling back of rights, especially on the federal level, talk to us a little bit about the importance of understanding the issues and voting.
Well, Democrats have a great chance of securing the state house and the state legislature. But, Democrats cannot rely on the growing unpopularity of Donald Trump or money to win. We're investing heavily in all of these races, statewide and nationally. The Democrats must educate voters on why they should vote. Now, they're always talking about the Democrats don't have a message. They're not doing anything. But if you look at the issues that the Democratic Party is supporting, a rise in the minimum wage, expansion of health care, protecting public schools, the environment, protecting the rights of women, protecting the rights of African Americans, specifically black males who are always under the gun via the state's judicial system. That is the message they should be educating voters about. They should be telling people, what have I done for you lately? And this is it. That is how they will garner the attention of black and white voters in this country, and people and some politicians are always talking about the Democratic Party taking the black vote for granted. We got to reverse that math. Black people are taking the Democratic Party for granted because that is the only party that listens to us and addresses the issues that are important to African Americans in this country. And Democrats must stop trying to push black people, aside and away from them, fearing that there will be a backlash from white voters who don't particularly care for black progress. As I said earlier, the base of the Democratic Party in this nation and in the state of Virginia are African Americans. If we don't vote, Democrats don't win. But at the same time, the Democrats must invest in money to educate people, white and black, about why we are working on issues that impact your lives and your families every day. The Republicans have taken conservative, working class, and low-income whites for granted, have utilized their vote to secure power in the state of Virginia and across the South and nationally, but they've done nothing for these people economically, done nothing for them. They've allowed all of the jobs to be exported across the globe, and they are trying to scare these people about the migrants that are coming over that actually benefit the nation's economy instead of taking jobs, because I don't think anybody would work for some of the salaries that some of these migrants are toiling for in the fields and in the factories and in the slaughterhouses of this country. But the Democrats must fight with education and must fight with determination to overcome this massive campaign of disinformation and gaslighting that the Republican Party has been using to secure power in the White House and the Congress. Does that make sense to you?
Well, look, you and I, we talk about this all the time, and of course it does. But one thing about it is you got to vote, and I think that's one thing that you mentioned that's extremely important. Yeah. But listen,
our vote is important. People always talk about, why should I vote? They're going to do what they want to. That's not true. But every vote is important.
That's right. Every vote matters. Here in the Commonwealth, we had one delegate seat that was decided because it was a tie vote. It was decided literally by someone pulling a straw. So every vote counts. Look, Brother Colvin, listen, every time we talk, it seems like we run out of time. But I'm going to have you back. If you want, if you will come back, looks, I appreciate what you're doing for the community, appreciate what you're doing for journalism as a whole, and journalism especially in the black community. Continue doing what you're doing. I know you're Emeritus, but continue doing that, and we're going to have you back very soon.
Well, I do thank you, and I hope the last 25 or 30 minutes I have made sense, and will be helpful to helping the forces of progress to move the state forward and black people forward in the state and nation.
Absolutely. And the only way we can do that is we continue to educate, advocate, and as Delegate Hayes says, litigate. But also we want to make sure that we continue to tell our story as you have. Once again, we want to thank all of you for listening here on Stay the Water as we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community. Until next time, be good, be great, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.